Okay guys, moving along in my series on a guided tour of the weapons of the melee/dueling combat universe, the smallest levers that can significantly be useful to you are roughly the size of your palm or maybe a little bigger. Not quite as big as a small knife, but there's no bright delineating line between these different lengths. It's long enough that I can hold it and have at least one end protruding for having the ability to strike without doing any painful impact to my body. I could hit with my fist like that, but the thumb side of my fist doesn't like hitting a wooden wall. But obviously this thing doesn't feel any pain as I'm using it. So I like training on the wall pill with pocket sticks. I like training on other implements with them as well. I've got this one. It's got a little bit of a diagonal end there. That makes for a very nice thrusting grip. You can put a lot of your weight behind it easily and safely. There are many other applications, but that takes care of the things you might want to do on a wall pill, and I'll be back in a little bit with more. Okay, continuing our adventures with palm sticks. Now I've got a safety version. This is just a bit of soft rubber hose. I'm not going to injure anything that I hit with it, including training partners. In this case, an expensive piece of training equipment that I don't want to mark up with a rattan or a wood or a metal palm stick. So I can hit this guy all I want with this and do no damage. I can use my loaded fist. I don't have to limit myself just to the pocket stick. I can reach around to the far side since I've got a head here, right, and come back. I can even use a check hand in between my motions. So this is, in its own way, as good or better than the wall pill because it more closely simulates a human head. And of course, that's not the only target, but I really like training with this, using this. Okay, so having looked at a few simple concepts for training with a pocket stick, nothing too elaborate, I want to talk a little bit about variations on the theme of a pocket stick or a palm stick. You could improvise one from a number of different sources. This would be in an office, it's a Sharpie. You absolutely can shadow fight with your Sharpie just like you would with a knife or anything else. It would work perfectly well. You can do it without one if you want to imagine you have a palm stick. A jump rope makes a fine improvised pair of pocket sticks. Very good on each end, and you have a fighting rope connecting it. You know what makes a fighting rope a fighting rope? It's a rope that someone who knows how to fight with a rope has in their hands. That's a fighting rope. There's a lot of good things I could do with it. Really innocuous looking, right? A fantastic improvised pair of weapons, 3 weapons. Getting into more dedicated designs, this is a very small double-ended knife. Not my favorite thing to pick up, but if it was a choice between nothing and this, I would certainly pick it up. Now this particular design, not necessarily the size, but having a point on each end starts to bring out a certain rule that I like to teach. I call it the weapons combat survival rule number 1. Before you worry about not getting cut or stabbed by your opponent, you gotta learn not to get cut or stabbed by yourself. I know that sounds like a joke, but anybody who's ever trained with weapons knows it's not completely a joke. Anybody who's ever hit themselves with a nunchaku, you notice I didn't use the other awful word nunchucks, which I never want to hear uttered around me. It's dangerous if I point it in such a way at my opponent that the other end is pointed back at me, right? Even if he impaled himself and ran onto it, the other end could get crushed into me. So I need to always be paying attention with a weapon like this. What is the line of both ends of the weapon, and are either of those lines pointing at me for more than a split second as I'm moving around with the weapon? So it's very important to learn how to go on a plane that's parallel to your anatomical plane instead of right on your anatomical plane like you might with a weapon that didn't have a point sticking back at you. So this brings out interesting things if you're paying attention. There are much bigger versions of a double-ended dagger, and I'll show you those in a future video. Here's another knife. very small, pretty much pocket stick sized knife. Nice little design. Now this is kind of on the borderline between, I'll use this, on the borderline between improvised and dedicated, and that is a nice balisong dagger. I've had this for a long time, longer than most of you folks have been alive. But closed, it makes a dandy pocket stick. If you want to work on using less than lethal force, you always have the option to then pop it out. If you know how to deploy a balisong dagger, you can go into your tactics that way. But very, very solid loaded fist between the brass of the fittings and the wood of the handle and the metal steel of the blade. You've got a nice heavy loaded fist. By the way, here's a trainer. This is not sharp, so you don't cut yourself. Here's a nice little dedicated form of pocket stick. It's carved from a carabao horn. It's a sort of a water buffalo native to the Philippines. And it's got a nice little bevel, like I showed you earlier on my pocket stick that I was hitting on the wall pel. So that little bevel can be supported by your thumb for reverse grip. I can flip it around into a thrusting grip, and this bevel is fitting nicely, almost like a Wolverine claw coming out of my palm, going out into the opponent. Very nice design. I like this quite a bit. Now this is an old Japanese weapon called a Manriki Gosari. I think it means 1,000-man weapon. But just like the jump rope, you've got two really nice pocket sticks. You could just hold the chain in your hand and use it as a pocket stick if that's what you wanted to do, or you could deploy it and start using it as a Manriki. So it also, as with all flexible weapons, can be used for grappling as well. Now, probably the pocket stick sized weapon most Westerners have seen before, either in movies or in real life, is brass knuckles. This is a palm stick in its own way. You can hammer both ways with it. Because it butts against the heel of your hand, it supports knuckle strikes really well. You do need to be careful. You can get injured using one of these. I don't like using the old trench knives that have brass knuckles on them because you can't manipulate very well. And as soon as you start to, if you get your fingers in a little bit of a jam and then there's impact on your blade, you've got some mangled fingers. But as a weapon all by itself, certainly way better, assuming it's legal where you live, certainly way better than nothing in my hand. Probably one of the most famous iterations of a palm stick sized weapon is the ring dagger, the karambit, the Indonesian karambit. I like this design. It's got a thumb post that makes for cuts with the inner edge, which is the inner edge should always be sharp. Sometimes the outer edge is dull and sometimes it's sharp. Very useful for manipulating the opponent's arms, and then you can deploy it and draw a cut with it at sensitive areas. Really useful as a weapon all by itself, and pretty darn useful supporting a knife in this hand. I really like this. I like this old laminated wood trainer too. It's one of my favorite personal training weapons. Here is a pocket. This is an interesting design. I've never seen this anywhere else. I got this from Century Martial Arts about 40 years ago. It's a pocket stick with a ring that freely spins. And I like it. I like that because it doesn't put dangerous feeling pressure on my fingers, and yet the ring keeps it from falling out of my hand. So you can use it for thrusting, you can use it for striking. Really interesting and useful design. So I think I've exhausted, as a survey and overview, the topic of pocket and palm sticks. From there, it's really up to you to train.